Hello.
Hi.
You are Tejas Kumar, correct?
That's right.
He was the keynote speaker here at that conference.
One of them. There's
Yes,
three.
one of the keynote speakers here at that conference. And you had an amazing keynote.
Thank you.
It was really, really impactful about how there is code and there are scars on people that you don't necessarily see, and how all of your life events kind of, the dots connect ultimately. Do you consider Steve Jobs, I guess, like one of your inspirational figures?
That's a tough question. I mean, he was, I think in some ways, but not others. He was a tough person to be around. He was probably not the best to work with. There's reports of him like throwing devices in the trash and we're like, this is nonsense, start over. And so no in that way. But I'd say yes in the way of having this like healthy perfectionism. Perfectionism can go wrong pretty easily, but not settling for less, I think, is something that I identify with. Mainly, I used to work as a director of DevRel in a past job, and my teammates, my reports would do presentations at conferences and things, and sometimes on the slide decks they wouldn't have like weird misalignments, where like headings and then the content that follows them would be like off by a few pixels, and I was just like, why? So to some degree, I tend to be a little bit pedantic because I see symmetry and I really appreciate like quality visuals and audio and just quality in general. So I'd identify with that. Yeah.
Okay. So you appreciate, visual symmetry, visual perfection, but some would argue that, perfection is the enemy of good enough.
Yes.
And so how do you draw that line?
Yeah, this is also where I've erred on the side of toxicity quite a few times, where, and I'm ashamed to admit this, right? But like I hear even good enough and I'm like, oh, come on, surely we can do better. What I've found to be helpful is time boxing things. So then you get some wiggle room with this idea of perfection, because perfection will take an infinite amount of time.
Yes.
I will never be perfect, neither will you ever in this lifetime, right? But if we time box it, we can say, I want this as close to perfect as possible by July 26th, 27th. And then good enough looks a lot better because we literally cannot do more within that time frame.
Correct.
So that's one way I've been able to kind of pace myself and recognize how much is close enough to perfect. I think perfect is a pipe dream, but I think on the way there, my dad used to say, if you shoot for the moon, you end up among the stars. So that's kind of what we try to do.
Cool. And so I guess relating to tech, a lot of up and coming software applications, a lot of businesses will, iterate and iterate and iterate before they go to market.
Yeah.
There comes a point, where that perfection to good enough, like what's your MVP, how, what are all the things you need to do to get to market? And one of the key topics that is a really big barrier for that usually is security or policies for these applications or these startups, because they may not have the expertise. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Yeah, quite a lot. The companies, I think, sometimes either, and so I work with part of the work I do is to work with a ton of developer-oriented companies like OpenSauce or Replay.io or LiveBlocks, etc. And not to say that these folks make those mistakes, but a mistake I see quite often is the timing of when do we think about these things, like security, like SOC 2 compliance, like ISO compliance, etc. And some companies do it way too early or way too late, but it's really hard to get it dialed in when. What I understand is, or rather what I've seen work really well is just expectation management and communicating expectations around go-to-market has been really vital. For example, I've seen this go wrong where users show up and they're expecting a product to be, I don't know, maybe more finished than it is, closer to good enough than it is. And then they're like, I hate this, I'm going to abandon it and I'm never coming back. This happens all the time. And users tend to be pretty entitled. I say that as an entitled user myself. If someone sells me, hey, this is a new serverless database that's going to be revolutionary, and I go use it and it's still not, then I'm immediately put off. And there's a really high chance I'm not coming back. Versus if they undersell, hey, it's still beta, we're working on it, and we'd love your feedback. We'd love to include you in that process, and we'll compensate you. When we do a general availability launch, then we'll give you either a discount or it's free for life or something like that.
Right.
That tends to go better. So in terms of go-to-market, that's kind of what I've seen.
The key go-to-market strategies of, undersell and maybe, compensate your early adopter,
right,
and bring them into the fold.
Yeah, instead of undersell, I would even say manage expectations. That's it. You can go to market whenever you want. I've seen founders who we need to be the first and go to market before the others.
Right.
Sure, but then are you communicating that the product is finished, or is it still a work? I think that's more important, because it would really suck if you're the first, but you're also the worst.
Yes.
And I've worked with founders who, will keep telling me like, hey, the early bird gets the worm. We need to.
Yeah.
But I always respond with, okay, but the second mouse gets the cheese. Like the first one dies because it's a trap. And so like Apple is really notorious for this. Like they let Meta do the Oculus thing for years. And now with one announcement with the Vision Pro, it's just like, oh, what? They're selling it for how much? It's like 10 times the price of an Oculus.
Yeah.
Which I feel like they might take over the market. Of course, I don't hold Apple in higher regard than I feel like I should. And I feel like there's a lot of Apple stans who tend to idolize the company. But I just let the numbers talk. And I mean, this last year, their profit is $99 billion. What? So that is a respectable thing.
Yes, agreed. There's a lot of aspects about building an application that are not the fun part or not the target, purpose of that application. How, in your experience, do developers manage those expectations as well? Because it's one thing to get an MVP of like, this thing works, this thing detects avocados.
Yeah.
Let's release it to the internet. And then it get used and abused by botnets, by cybersecurity attacks, by DDoS attacks, by, it's just feeding garbage data into your model and just destroying everything. So, do you have any experience in that space?
Yeah, I think really the goal here is exactly what I said earlier, which is just managing expectations. Because with a lot of SaaS products especially, they'll launch and they won't anticipate, oh, somebody's going to ask about GDPR.
Right.
But there's always that person. There's always the well, actually, right? And I feel like, so as a conference speaker, I anticipate that ahead of time. I anticipate that people are going to be like, oh, I have a question. And then what's the question? Oh, it's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah.
And I do this as a speaker, and I wish more companies would do this. And how would they do that then in the context of security and compliance?
Yeah. Do you outsource that? Do you bake it in-house?
Exactly. I think baking it in-house is just expensive and time-consuming. And frankly, I don't even know. They say there's an adage in engineering, which I'm sure you've heard because you used to be an engineer, which is don't roll your own crypto.
Yep.
And so I also won't roll my own web security, my own compliance, my own any of that, because I don't trust myself. I trust myself to do DevRel. I trust myself to do front-end, back-end, DevOps engineering, but there's security that is so hard to dial in perfectly. Even if we roll our own, I think there's value in getting a second opinion, right? Because this is not something you want to take lightly. One breach and then you've got this reputation that sticks. So definitely, I think there's room to explore outsourcing.
Okay.
I'm curious about Pangea, if I can ask.
Sure, of course.
Does it function as a drop-in replacement or drop-in addition of a security team? Like if I had this avocado thing, can I just be like, hey, Pangea, come do all our security stuff?
So we ourselves are an API. So we have SDKs, we have an API, it's a service.
Right.
And so, you add us into your code as you're developing your application. If you need to put in a secure audit log, you put in the secure audit log API call, or you download the SDK and make the call to Pangea. You have to go to Pangea and enable the secure audit log functionality of the service, of course, and copy over the token. But it's not like a drop-in replace. It's like an add where you need it kind of service.
What services can I use Pangea for? I mean, you use the audit log as an example. What else can I do?
You also have redaction, and that covers user information, so PII, social security numbers, credit cards, usernames, addresses, everything like that. It also covers financial information. So if you have more specific banking information, it'll cover that.
What does it mean, cover that? Like I would...
It masks it from any kind of log or string input.
How do I do that over? Sorry, I hope you don't mind getting too much in the weeds. How does that work? Like so I would then call out to the Pangea API to mask data and I would pass it like an object and be like, give this back to me, mask?
Mask.
Okay.
And so as opposed to, in logging, PII, you just call the redaction service and all in one call, it'll redact that information and put it into the log.
Awesome. And then I can also maybe put that into some database where I don't care about that stuff. I just care about analytics and things.
Correct.
That's awesome.
Yes. And so all of that is pre-rolled, and the secure audit log itself it's fully secure. We've pen tested the living lights out of it.
Nice.
And so that's pretty nice. Other services that Pangea does have are IP intelligence services. So for any DDoS or botnet attacks, you can pass in the IP address, the domain name, the whatever you would like to call it, the username even if you would like to, and it'll retrieve a score of whether it is malicious or not.
Wow, that's really useful. And these are the things, as you mentioned with the go-to-market, these are things people are not thinking about. They're just, okay, I want to go to market naively, but this gives you a whole extra layer of security.
GIF or GIF?
GIF.
Coffee, hot or cold?
Hot.
Sweet or savory?
Savory.
Vim or Emacs?
Neither.
Vinyl or digital?
Digital.
iOS or Android?
iOS.
Is the earth flat or round?
Flat. Round. Totally round. Totally.
Awesome. And that covers the segment.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.